The first crack of hail hit the window like a warning shot. Penny Chamberlain had been in Wyoming territory for exactly 3 days, just long enough to know that her old life in Boston had not prepared her for any of this. They told her to wait. They warned her the storm was coming. But she was 22 years old and had already crossed an entire country alone after burying both her parents. She wasn't about to be frightened by a little bad weather. That was her first mistake. Within an hour, hailstones the size of marbles were raining down like bullets. Her horse was panicking. The endless prairie offered no shelter, no trees, no rocks, just an ocean of grass turning white with ice. And then, through the sheet of falling hail, a dark figure appeared. A rider galloping straight toward her. He didn't ask permission. He just swept open his heavy coat, pulled her close against his chest, and created a shelter for them both. "I know a place," he shouted over the storm. "Just hold on tight." What Penny didn't know was that this cowboy had defied orders to find her. He had a feeling, call it fate, that she would need him. And 25 years later, he finally told her the truth. This story reminds us that the storms in our lives often lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Sometimes the person who rescues you becomes the home you've been searching for all along. If you believe that love finds you when you least expect it, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments. What city are you watching from tonight? The first sharp crack of hail on the window pane made Penny Chamberlain jump, and she nearly let go of the porcelain teacup in her trembling hands. It was 1878, and she had been in Wyoming territory for exactly 3 days. That was just long enough to know that her old life in Boston had not prepared her for the raw power of the western frontier. "A storm's rolling in fast, Miss Chamberlain," Miss Weatherby warned, peeking through the lace curtains of her boarding house. "You best put off that trip to your uncle's ranch till morning." Penny just shook her head, her chestnut curls bouncing. "I simply cannot. Uncle James is expecting me today, and I have already been delayed twice because of the train schedule. I will be just fine. Your directions say it is only 7 miles. The older woman's frown etched deeper lines around her mouth. 7 miles in Wyoming is a far cry from 7 miles back east, child, especially when the sky turns mean. These spring storms pop up out of nowhere." But Penny's mind was made up. At 22 years old, she had crossed the whole country by herself after her parents passed away. She was determined to take her uncle up on his offer to help run his booming cattle ranch. She was not about to be frightened off by a little bad weather. An hour later, with her rented mare fighting against a wind that was getting stronger by the minute, Penny had to admit Mrs. Weatherby might have had a point. The clear blue ski had vanished, replaced by a dark, angry wall of bruised-looking clouds. The temperature had plunged so fast that her breath turned to mist right in front of her face, even though it had been perfectly warm when she left town. The first piece of hail hit her shoulder like a tiny stone, making her gasp. Then another hit, and soon dozens more were coming down in a furious attack. "Oh, for my cow." Her horse whinnied, scared, and sidestepped as ice the size of marbles rained down on them. "Easy, girl," Penny whispered, trying to soothe the horse, but her own heart was pounding inside her chest. She searched the open land for any sign of safety. The rolling plains gave no cover, no trees, no rocks, just an endless ocean of grass that was now turning white under the growing layer of hail. The hailstones got bigger, stinging her hands and face with a sharp pain. Her mare suddenly reared up, almost throwing her to the ground. Penny grabbed onto the saddle horn for dear life, a cold fear creeping in as she realized she had made a terrible, maybe even deadly, mistake. "Help!" she cried out, but the roar of the storm swallowed her voice. "Is anybody out there?" Then, like an answer to her prayer, a dark figure appeared through the sheet of falling ice, a rider coming toward her at a full gallop. As the rider got closer, she could see it was a man on a big, powerful stallion, his wide shoulders hunched over against the storm. "Follow me," he yelled over the noise, his voice deep and steady. He did not wait for an answer, just steered his horse right up next to hers, and then he did something that left Penny completely stunned. He unbuttoned his heavy duster coat and swept it open wide, making a temporary roof over both of their horses' heads. "Get in close," he commanded. "Bring your mare right under here." Shocked by his quick thinking, Penny steered her frightened horse under the cover of his coat. The stranger's arm wrapped firmly around her waist, pulling her close against his strong chest as he held the coat over them and their animals. "I know a place," he shouted close to her ear, his breath warm on her cold cheek. "It is not far. Just hold on tight." He spurred his horse on, leading both of them through the storm that was only getting worse. Penny was pressed right up against him, safe from the worst of the hail beneath his coat. She caught quick glimpses of his face, which had a strong jaw and was weathered by the elements, with eyes the color of a stormy sky. After what felt like forever but was probably just a few minutes, a small building appeared in the white landscape. It was a line shack, and its wooden walls were the most welcome sight she had ever seen. The stranger swung down from his horse like he had done it 1,000 times, keeping the coat held up to shield the horses. "Inside, quick." Penny's fingers were so cold and numb she could hardly move. Without a second thought, he reached up and lifted her right out of the saddle like she weighed nothing at all. He set her down gently on the ground before leading both horses to the sheltered side of the cabin. The inside of the shack was simple, but it was wonderfully dry. A small iron stove sat in one corner with a single narrow cot against the other wall. The stranger moved with a purpose that showed he was used to tough situations. He struck a match and got a small fire going in the stove while Penny just stood there, dripping and shivering. "You must be the Chamberlain girl," he said, more as a statement than a question, with his back to her as he tended the fire. "James's niece from back east." The surprise of him knowing her name pushed aside her chill for a moment. "How did you know that?" He stood up straight and turned to face her for the first time. Even with his clothes soaked, he had a natural confidence about him. His face, though he looked young, maybe 28 or 30, was tan and lined from spending years under the western sun. "Name's Dylan Caldwell," he told her, taking off his wet hat and showing dark hair that was curling at his collar. "I work on your uncle's spread. He sent me to meet your stagecoach 3 days ago, but you were not on it." "The train was late," Penny explained, feeling like she had to defend herself. "I only got in late last night." Dylan nodded as if her answer was good enough. "And of course you decided to ride out all by yourself just as the meanest spring storm of the year was about to hit." His voice was not harsh, but she could hear the gentle scolding in it. Penny lifted her chin a little. "I had no idea the weather would change so quickly," she said. "In Boston, hailstorms do not just appear out of a clear sky." A small smile barely touched his lips. "This is not Boston, Miss Chamberlain." "I'm starting to see that, Mr. Caldwell." The fire was burning well now, and a wonderful wave of heat spread through the little room. Dylan walked over to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a thick woolen blanket. "You ought to get out of those wet things," he said, handing the blanket to her. "I will go check on the horses." Penny held the blanket, suddenly feeling very awkward about their situation. "Oh, I could not possibly." "You can and you will," he cut in gently but firmly, "unless you want to catch a deathly sickness before you even see your uncle's ranch. I will give you your privacy." Before she could say another word, he was gone, shutting the door behind him. Penny stood there for a second, frozen. But then common sense won out over her modesty. Her traveling dress was soaked clear through, and she could already feel a deep chill setting into her bones. With shaking fingers, she unbuttoned her wet clothes and wrapped the scratchy but wonderfully dry blanket around herself. The fire was making the small cabin warm, and she stepped closer to it, holding her hands out to the heat. Outside, she could hear Dylan moving around, talking softly to the horses. Even though she was uncomfortable with the situation, she felt a wave of thankfulness for him. If he had not shown up when he did, she could have been in real danger. A sharp knock came at the door. "Are you decent?" he called out. "Yes," she answered, pulling the blanket even tighter. Dylan came back inside, carrying her saddlebags and his own pack. He was careful not to look directly at her as he put her things down next to her. "The horses are settled in under the lean-to," he said, taking off his own soaked coat and hanging it by the stove. "This storm is settling in for a good one. We will be here for a while." Penny swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "How long is a while?" Dylan just shrugged, rolling up his damp shirt sleeves. She could see his forearms were strong and tanned, dark against the white fabric. "Hard to say. Sometimes these spring storms blow over in an hour. Other times they turn to snow and stick around for a day or two." Snow in April. His smile was quick but real. "Welcome to Wyoming territory, Miss Chamberlain." Dylan kept himself busy with Practical things like checking the shack's small supply of food, putting a pot of coffee on the stove to boil, and laying out her clothes to dry. He moved with a smooth efficiency that showed he had spent a lifetime taking care of himself. "Your uncle has been talking about you coming for months," he said, just making conversation as he measured coffee grounds into the pot. "He said you were quite good with numbers back in Boston." Penny nodded, surprised he knew that about her. "My father was an accountant. He taught me everything he knew when it was clear my brothers did not have a mind for it. James can sure use the help. His ranch is growing so fast he cannot keep up with the books. Been losing money just from simple mistakes." "That is exactly why he asked me to come," Penny said. "After my parents passed on last winter, there did not seem to be much reason to stay in Boston." A quiet, comfortable feeling settled in the room as the coffee started to brew. Outside, the hail kept pounding on the roof like 1,000 tiny drums. Dylan poured the hot coffee into 2 tin cups and offered one to Penny. "It is not your fancy Boston tea," he warned, "but it will warm you up." Their fingers touched for a second when she took the cup and up, and it sent a strange little flutter through her that had nothing to do with being cold. She took a quick sip to hide her surprise, and the strong, bitter coffee burned her tongue. "How long have you worked for my uncle?" she asked, hoping to find a safer topic. 5 years, come this summer," Dylan answered, sitting down on a wooden chair. That groaned under his weight. "I started out as a regular ranch hand, made foreman last year." "That is quite an accomplishment for a man your age." She saw something flicker in his eyes, maybe a little bit of amusement. "I am 32, Miss Chamberlain, not exactly a boy anymore." Penny felt her cheeks get warm. "I did not mean to offend you. I just meant you have done very well for yourself. Out here, you either grow up fast or you do not grow up at all." He took a drink of his coffee, looking at her over the top of his cup. "Your uncle told me you are 22. That is unusual for a lady from the East your age to still be unmarried." It was a very direct question, the kind that would have been seen as incredibly rude back in Boston society. But somehow there was no judgment in his tone, only a plain curiosity. She admitted she had prospects, but none she cared for. "My father told me to hold out for a match that was both smart and held real affection." Maybe that was a foolish idea. Dylan's face seemed to get a little kinder. Not foolish, just uncommon. The simple way he said it caught her off guard. In her world, men did not often put much stock in a woman's wish for a good partnership, thinking it was just feelings getting in the way of what was practical. "And what about you, Mr. Caldwell?" She heard herself ask, "Is there a Mrs. Caldwell waiting for you to come home?" His smile had a bit of sorrow in it. "No, ma'am. This kind of life does not leave much time for courting. The cattle do not know if it is Sunday or Christmas Day. They need looking after either way." A real strong gust of wind shook the shack's windows, and it made Penny jump. Dylan stood up without a fuss and went to check the shutters. "We are safe," he told her, coming back to his chair. "This is not the first storm these old walls have seen, and it will not be the last." As if to prove him wrong, a loud crack echoed from above. Then a steady drip of water started to fall near the small bed. Dylan muttered something under his breath and right away said he was sorry. "Pardon my words, Miss Chamberlain. It looks like we have sprung a leak." He found an empty pot, put it under the drips, and then looked up at the ceiling with a frown. "The roof took a beating from the hail. I will have to patch it before this turns into a real gully washer." Without another thought, he put on his coat that was still wet and took a small canvas roll from his bag. "I will be quick," he said, "but you stay by the fire. There is no reason for both of us to get soaked all over again." Before Penny could even say a word, he was out the door, which shut hard against the howling wind. Through the one dirty window, she could see his dark shape climbing onto the low roof with surprising ease. The minutes felt like hours as the storm kept raging, and her worry got bigger with every second that passed. When the door finally swung open again, Dylan came inside with water pouring off his hat and shoulders. Even though he was clearly uncomfortable, his face showed he was pleased. "That ought to hold for now," he said, taking off his soaking coat, "at least until we can get back with the right supplies." Penny just looked at him, amazed by how calm and capable he was. Back in Boston, a leaky roof would have meant calling for repairmen and maybe waiting for days to get service. Out here, Dylan had just taken care of the problem himself, without a single complaint or any delay. "You are soaked to the bone again," she pointed out, getting up from her spot by the fire. "Please, you take the blanket. I can put my dress back on now. It is almost dry." Dylan shook his head. "I have dry clothes in my pack. It is one of the good things about riding prepared." He pulled a clean shirt and pants out of his saddlebag, then stopped, obviously thinking about how to change in such a small room. Penny quickly turned her back to him, staring hard at the dancing flames inside the stove. "I will not look," she promised, feeling a blush creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. She heard the sound of clothes rustling behind her and the soft thump of his boots coming off. It felt strangely personal, knowing he was changing his clothes just a few feet away, with only her own sense of decency between them. "You can turn around," he finally said, and his voice was closer than she had thought. Penny turned and saw him standing right next to her, his wet clothes now hanging beside hers near the stove. The fresh shirt was stretched across his shoulders, showing off the strength that came from years of hard work. His hair, wet from the rain, was curling more than before around his face. "My turn to make the coffee," she said, just needing something to do other than notice how his being there made the tiny cabin feel even smaller. While she kept busy with the coffee pot, Dylan took a look at their food. "We have got jerky, beans, and hard biscuits," he announced. "It is not exactly a grand meal, but it will keep us alive until the storm is over." "I have some fruit preserves in my saddlebag," Penny added. "My landlady made me take them for the trip." Dylan's eyebrows went up. Preserves. Now that is a real treat out in these parts. Working together, they put together a simple supper. The small chore of preparing food created a surprising feeling of closeness. They ate without much talking, while the storm outside played a loud and dramatic tune. As the sun started to go down, the very real problem of where to sleep could not be put off any longer. The cabin had just one narrow cot, hardly big enough for one person, much less two. "You will take the bed," Dylan stated with finality, already unrolling his bedroll on the floor by the stove. "I have slept on a lot worse than this plank floor plenty of times." Penny wanted to argue, but she knew it would be no use. Instead, she just said, "Thank you for everything you did today. I am realizing now how foolish I was to try and make this journey by myself." Dylan's expression got softer in the dimming light. "Not foolish, just not experienced. Wyoming is a place that takes some getting used to." "Will I?" she asked, and was surprised by how vulnerable her own question sounded. "Get used to it, is what I mean." He thought about it. For a long moment, his gray eyes full of thought. Some folks do, some folks do not. It all depends on what a person is looking for, I guess. "I am not really sure," she confessed. "Safety, I think. A sense of purpose. After I lost my parents, Boston just felt empty." Dylan nodded his head slowly. "I cannot promise you safety. This land is just too wild for that. But purpose. You will find a whole lot of that here. Your uncle needs you, Miss Chamberlain. That is something that matters. Penny," she said all of a sudden, "if we are going to be stuck here together, you may as well call me by my first name." A little smile played on his lips. "Penny it is then, and my friends call me Dylan." "Are we friends, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked, her voice a little quieter than she meant for it to be. His gaze held hers. "I reckon we could be. If you decide to stay." "I plan on it," she said with conviction, and she realized she meant it more in that moment than when she had first gotten off the train 3 days before. Outside, the storm kept on playing its wild music, but inside the little cabin, something quiet and new had shifted between them. Penny went to the cot, pulling her now dry traveling dress on over her undergarment for the sake of modesty, while Dylan banked the fire down for the night. In the quiet dark, listening to the even sound of his breathing from across the room, Penny started to wonder what strange turn of fate had put her in his path that day. What if the storm had hit an hour later, or if Uncle James had sent a different ranch hand instead of his foreman? Sleep finally took her, and her dreams were full of hailstones, running, horses, and a pair of stormy gray eyes that seemed to look right into her very soul. The morning came with a surprising brightness. Penny woke up to sunshine pouring through the cabin's single window. The storm had apparently worn itself out sometime during the night. Dylan was already awake, his bedroll put away neatly as he worked on getting the fire going again. "Coffee is ready," he said to her, his voice a little rough from the morning. The storm is gone, but it left a real mess behind. We should be able to make it to the ranch by noon if we get an early start. Penny sat up, feeling a bit messy after sleeping in her clothes all night. I will just need a minute to make myself look a little better. Dylan nodded and grabbed his hat. I will go check on the horses. Take all the time you need. Once she was alone, Penny did her best to fix her hair without her usual combs and hairpins. She tried to smooth out the wrinkles in her dress, wishing she had a fresh set of clothes to change into. Still, she told herself, how she looked would not matter much after the ride ahead. She would probably show up at her uncle's ranch looking disheveled no matter what. When Dylan came back, he was holding something in his gloved hands. It was a small bunch of bright wildflowers. I found these growing right beside the cabin, he explained, handing them to her in a slightly awkward way. I thought they might cheer you up after the storm. The simple kindness of it touched her more than any fancy bouquet she had ever gotten from a suitor in Boston. They are so beautiful, she said with real feeling as she took them. I did not think anything could have survived that hail. That is Wyoming for you, Dylan answered, a warm look on his face. It beats you down one day, then turns around and shows you its beauty the next. The ride to the ranch showed just how much of a mark the storm had left. Hailstones were still scattered in the shady spots, though they were melting fast in the morning sun. The whole landscape looked like it had been washed clean and made new. Wildflowers were already pushing their way up through the rain-dampened ground. Your uncle's place is right over that next rise, Dylan said, pointing as they reached the top of a small hill around noon. It is one of the better spreads in this whole territory. He started with just 50 head of cattle when I first signed on. Now he runs over 500. As they got closer, Penny saw for the first time what was going to be her new home. It was a long ranch house built from thick, sturdy logs, with several other buildings and a corral that held horses in different stages of being trained. Smoke was curling up from the main house's chimney in a welcoming way. The front door flew open before they had even made it to the yard, and out came a stout man with a thick gray beard. James Chamberlain came down the steps much faster than you would expect for a man of 60 years, with a huge grin spreading across his face. "Penny, my girl," he shouted. "We were afraid for the worst when that storm blew in. Thank the good Lord that Dylan found you." He pulled her into a bear hug the second Dylan helped her off her horse, lifting her right off the ground with his excitement. "Uncle James," she laughed, hugging him back just as tight. "It is so wonderful to finally meet you in the flesh." "Why, you favor your mother something fierce," he announced, setting her on her feet to get a proper look. "But that Chamberlain chin is yours, no doubt about it." He faced Dylan and gave his shoulder a hearty clap. "And you, son, sending you was the smartest thing I could have done. I knew I could always rely on you when things get tight." Dylan lowered his head with humility. "I was just in the right spot at the right time, sir." "Don't be modest. When you two didn't show up last night, I was worried sick that wicked hailstorm had caught you. I was about to send the men out looking for you at sunrise if you hadn't arrived." A wave of heat crept up Penny's neck when she understood what their overnight trip implied. "Mr. Caldwell was a true gentleman, Uncle. We took cover in an old line shack till the weather broke." James dismissed her worry with a wave of his hand. "Never had a single doubt. That man, Dylan, is the most decent fellow on this whole ranch." He guided them toward the main house. "Get on inside, you two. Mrs. Henderson cooked up a whole spread, since we figured you'd be here yesterday." The inside of the ranch house was unexpectedly cozy. It was rustic, sure, but nicely furnished with solid furniture, and the wooden floors were softened by colorful, hand-woven rugs. A cheerful, gray-haired woman came forward, telling them she was Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper. "Oh, you poor thing, look at you, all tired and windswept." She fussed over Penny, taking her travel case. "I've got the blue room all ready for you, with a hot bath already drawn. You go on and get cleaned up while I put the finishing touches on supper." Dylan cleared his throat. "If it is all the same to you, Mr. Chamberlain, I ought to check on the horses and see how the herd made it through the storm." "Nonsense," James declared. "The other fellows can handle it for one evening. You've more than earned a seat at my dinner table tonight, son." A silent understanding seemed to pass between the two men. It was respect, for sure, but there was something more profound there that Penny could not quite put her finger on. Dylan gave a nod of agreement, taking off his hat and raking a hand through his messy hair. Well, in that case, I suppose I will get myself cleaned up too. About an hour later, feeling renewed from her bath and wearing a fresh set of clothes, Penny came downstairs to see her uncle and Dylan deep in a lively talk in the dining room. Both men stood up as she entered, and Penny was taken aback by the change in Dylan's appearance. He had obviously spent some time getting ready. His dark hair was still a little wet from being washed, and his face was freshly shaved. He had put on a clean shirt, and even though it was the simple clothing of a ranch hand, he looked surprisingly handsome. "Well, there she is," James said with a wide smile. "Feeling a bit more human, I trust." "Much more," Penny replied as she accepted the chair Dylan pulled out for her. "I don't think I've ever appreciated a bath quite so much." "You will find that a lot of things seem more precious out here," her uncle noted with wisdom. "The comforts of civilization mean a whole lot more when you can't take them for granted." The supper was substantial and delicious, with roast beef, potatoes, warm bread straight from the oven, and greens from the ranch's own kitchen. Garden. Mrs. Henderson hovered over them, making sure they took second helpings and glowing with pride at their compliments. All through the dinner, James entertained Penny with tales of the ranch's early struggles, sometimes asking Dylan to fill in a memory or offer his own perspective. She found herself observing the younger man as he talked, noticing the quiet self-assurance that was so natural to him, and the polite manner he used with her uncle that never compromised his own dignity. "This fella Dylan started out here like any other drifter looking for work," James was explaining, "but I saw his grit right away. I have never known a man who understands horses better or who keeps a cooler head when trouble starts. My uncle is laying it on a bit thick," Dylan said modestly, although his face showed he appreciated the kind words. "The devil I am," James retorted. "When that big cat stirred up the herd last spring, who was it that kept 500 animals from stampeding right off a cliff? And when the river swelled and nearly washed out the lower pasture, who got the men together to dig that diversion ditch that saved our best grazing land?" Penny was truly impressed. "It certainly sounds like my uncle's faith in you is well-deserved, Mr. Caldwell." "Dylan," he corrected her softly, his eyes meeting hers directly for the first time since their arrival. "I believe we settled on that." The simple callback to their private talk in the shack sent a surprising jolt of warmth through her. "Yes, of course, Dylan." James shot a look between them, a curious spark in his eyes that Penny decided to overlook. Once the meal was over, Dylan made his apologies, explaining that he had real duties on the ranch that he could not put off any longer. He stopped at the doorway and turned back to face Penny. "Miss Chamberlain, Penny," he corrected himself, "I surely hope you find whatever it is you came out here for. Wyoming is not always an easy place, as you have already seen, but it offers its own kind of rewards." She gave a nod, feeling an odd reluctance to watch him leave. "Thank you again for all your help yesterday. I am not sure how things would have turned out if you had not shown up right then." "Just part of the job," he answered, but his gaze hinted at something more. With a final, respectful nod to James, he was gone, leaving Penny feeling a strange pang of emptiness, despite the genuine welcome of her new residents. "He is a good man, that one," James remarked, noticing her gaze following Dylan's departure. "One of the best." "He appears to be very capable," Penny replied with care. James let out a chuckle. "Capable, yes. He is also loyal, a hard worker, and honest as the day is long. Those are not things to be dismissed lightly, especially in this country." Before Penny could say more, Mrs. Henderson came to give her a tour of the rest of the house, and the opportunity was lost. She spent the rest of her day exploring the new place and starting to grasp the scale of the enterprise her uncle had built from the ground up. The account books, which James presented to her after supper, proved what Dylan had hinted at. The ranch was indeed doing well, but its financial records were a complete disaster. The columns of numbers did not add up. Expenditures were jotted down without any real system, and the money from cattle sales was not tracked with any consistency. "I can certainly understand why you needed assistance," Penny commented, already mapping out her plan of attack in her head. "This ranch could be doing far better than the books show, or maybe even worse. It is impossible to know from this mess." James nodded with a rueful look. "Figures and sums were never my strong suit. Put me in charge of a herd or a wild horse, and I know exactly what to do. But all this paperwork—" He motioned toward the tangled ledgers. Well, that is the very reason I sent for you. I will get it all sorted out, Penny promised. It might take a little while, but I will build a system that even you can follow. Her uncle's hearty laugh echoed in the study. Now that would be a true miracle, but I have no doubt you can pull it off, girl. You have your father's sharp mind and your mother's grit. The mention of her parents brought a sharp, bittersweet ache. I miss them more than words can say. James's face grew gentle. Of course you do, child. They were wonderful people. Your father is the reason this ranch survived, you know. He gave me that loan when I was barely getting by my own. None of what you see here would exist if not for him. This was a complete surprise to Penny. He never said a word about it. He wouldn't. It was not in his nature to brag about helping his own kin. James poured a small measure of whiskey into 2 glasses, handing one to Penny. To Charles and Margaret Chamberlain, may they rest easy knowing their daughter is safe and with her own folks. Penny took a sip of the strong liquor, feeling its warmth spread through her. To family, she repeated softly. The days that followed soon fell into a comfortable pattern. Penny would get up early and have breakfast with her uncle before he headed out to manage the daily work of the ranch. Her mornings were dedicated to the monumental task of straightening out the messy account books, building new logical methods for tracking the ranch's finances. During the afternoons, she would often join Mrs. Henderson in the vegetable patch or assist with chores around the house, slowly learning the daily pulse of life on the ranch. From time to time, James would take her riding across the property, pointing out the borders of his land, sharing his vision for expansion, and having her meet the ranch hands who work for him. Dylan was usually there on these excursions, riding beside James and adding his own knowledge about the business. Penny realized she was becoming more and more conscious of him. The way he sat so naturally in the saddle, the deference he received from the other men, and the quiet command in his voice whenever he spoke. A week after she had settled in, Penny was at her desk in the ranch office when she heard a rap on the open door. She glanced up and saw Dylan standing in the doorway holding his hat. I hope I am not bothering you, he said. Your uncle wanted me to give you these receipts from my supply trip into town. Penny motioned toward the chair on the other side of her desk. Not in the least, as a matter of fact. You are saving me a task. I was just about to ask about these exact expenses. Dylan took a seat in the chair, setting a small pile of papers down in front of her. So how are you getting on with the books? It is a challenge, she confessed with a slight laugh. Uncle James has a very particular style of accounting. Meaning no style at all, Dylan offered, his eyes crinkling at the corners in amusement. Something to that effect. She began to organize the receipts, making mental notes of the figures and assigning them to categories. I am making headway, however. Give me another month, and I ought to have a much better handle on the ranch's true financial situation. Dylan nodded, looking genuinely impressed. James is a lucky man to have you here. There are not many ladies who would take on a job like this, especially coming all the way from the comforts of Boston. Not many women have my kind of education, Penny clarified. I was lucky my father felt that daughters deserve the same schooling as sons. That was forward thinking for sure, though I cannot say it made me a popular choice with the young gentlemen. Most men seem to want a wife who can talk about the latest fashions instead of finance. Dylan looked at her for a long moment. Then it was their loss, I reckon. That simple declaration, spoken so plainly without any flattery, meant more to Penny than any fancy compliment ever could. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet. Miss Chamberlain. Penny, he started, but then he paused, looking uncharacteristically unsure of himself. Your uncle was saying that you might be interested in seeing a bit more of the area now that you are getting your feet under you. There is a town social. We're having a little get-together in town next Saturday. It is nothing too special, just a community dance over at the schoolhouse. If that sounds like something you would enjoy, I would be mighty pleased to take you. The offer caught her by surprise, but it was a pleasant one. A dance? That sounds wonderful. I would really like that. A chance to meet some of the local folks. A look of relief washed over his face. Good. That is real good. I will get a buggy ready instead of us riding horses. It would be more fitting for the night. Before she could say another word, the sound of a horse coming in hard drew their eyes to the window. A rider was pushing his mount fast, the animal slick with sweat. Dylan shot to his feet, the easy conversation completely gone. "Something is wrong," he said under his breath, already moving for the door. Penny was right behind him on the porch as the rider, one of the younger hands, was swinging down from his saddle. "Mr. Caldwell," the boy gasped, his face red and his voice tight with panic. "Rustlers hit the north pasture. They made off with near 30 head, and Pete has been shot." Dylan's face turned to stone. The man who had just asked her to a dance was gone, replaced by the hard look of the ranch foreman. "How bad is he?" "It is a shoulder wound. It will not kill him, but he is losing a lot of blood. Mr. Chamberlain sent me to get you and Doc Wilson from town." "You ride for the doctor," Dylan commanded. "I will round up the men and supplies." He then turned to Penny. "We might be gone all night. Please tell Mrs. Henderson we need bandages and the strong whiskey." He did not wait for her to answer. He was already striding toward the stables, yelling out the names of the men he needed. In less than 20 minutes, a posse of 6 riders thundered out of the ranch yard. Dylan was at the front, their rifles shining in the afternoon sun. As she watched them ride over the hill, the harsh truth of life on the frontier hit Penny hard. The quiet calm of the past week had fooled her into feeling safe, but there was no mistaking the reality now. This land was full of dangers she was only just starting to understand. Mrs. Henderson found her still standing on the porch, just looking out at the empty horizon. "Come on and help me with these bandages, dear," the older woman said softly. "Keeping your hands busy is the best thing to do when the men have to ride out like that." "Are they going to be okay?" Penny asked, letting the housekeeper lead her back inside. "Dylan is leading them," Mrs. Henderson answered plainly, as if that single fact was all the reassurance anyone needed. "He does not take foolish chances, but he will not let rustlers just walk off with your uncle's cattle either." The hours passed by so slowly it was painful. Penny helped get the supplies ready, then tried to go back to her books, but she just kept reading the same numbers over and over without them making any sense. By the time supper rolled around, there was still no word from the men, and her unease had turned into a deep worry. "Should we be worried yet?" she asked her uncle's housekeeper as they sat down to a meal that neither of them felt much like eating. Mrs. Henderson's lined face showed her own concern, even though her words were meant to be calming. "This is not the first time we have had to deal with rustlers, child. It probably will not be the last. The men know what they are about." It was well after midnight when Penny, who could not sleep a wink, heard horses coming into the yard. She scrambled to her window, pushing open the shutters to see a line of tired riders getting off their horses in the pale moonlight. A wave of relief washed over her when she saw Dylan, looking unharmed, giving quiet orders to the other men. Without even thinking if it was proper, she wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and hurried down the stairs. By the time she got to the porch, most of the men had already headed for their bunks, leaving just Dylan, who was making sure the horses were secure. "You are back safe," she said just to get his attention. He turned around, and she could see the surprise on his face. "You ought to be in bed." "I could not until I knew for sure." His expression softened. "We are all fine. We got most of the cattle back. Pete is in town with the doctor. He is going to be all right." In the moonlight, Penny saw a dark smudge high on his cheek. "You are hurt," she said, stepping a little closer. "It is nothing, just a scrape I got from a tree branch." Without thinking, she reached up and touched his face, looking at the small cut. "Come on inside. I will clean that up for you." He caught her hand, gently pulling it down. "It is late, Penny, and you are not exactly dressed to be out in the yard." The reminder of her thin nightgown, barely covered by the shawl, made her cheeks burn. "Of course I was not thinking. I was just so worried." Something in his eyes changed then, a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the long night's ride. "You were?" "Yes," she admitted. "For all of you, of course." A faint smile touched his lips. "Of course," he let go of her hand, though he seemed hesitant to do it. "Go on back inside. We can talk in the morning." But the morning brought a whole new set of problems. James got back before the sun was up, having spent the night with the injured ranch hand, and he pulled Dylan straight into a planning meeting. By the time Penny came downstairs for breakfast, all the decisions had been made. "We are putting more men on patrol along the north fence line," her uncle told her over a cup of coffee. "We cannot risk another raid with the spring calving season just around the corner." "The rustlers," she asked, "did you catch any of them?" James and Dylan shared a quick look. Not yet, Dylan was the one who answered. But we have a good idea which outfit they belong to. The Harper gang has been stirring up trouble all over the territory. Dylan will be spending more time out on the range, James added. At least until we are sure the threat is past. Penny felt a surprising wave of disappointment at the news. What about the dance in town, she asked, and then wished she could take the words back when both men looked at her, surprised. I am afraid that will have to wait, James said, shooting Dylan a curious glance. Keeping the ranch safe has to come before any parties. Of course, Penny said quickly. I understand completely. Dylan's face was impossible to read. Maybe some other time, when things have settled down a bit. That promised other time never seemed to arrive. For the next 3 weeks, Dylan was hardly ever at the main house. He spent most of his days and a lot of his nights on patrol with the other hands or meeting with neighboring ranchers to set up a coordinated defense. The few times Penny did see him, he was usually in a serious talk with her uncle or riding out with a group of men. Even though he was gone so much, Penny found her thoughts drifting to him often. She kept remembering the scary time they shared during the hailstorm, but also smaller moments, like the quiet confidence in his voice when he explained how the ranch worked, or the rare smile that completely changed his serious face, or the respectful way he actually listened when she talked about her ideas for the ranch's books. James, for his part, did not seem to notice her distraction at all. He kept including her in the ranch business, relying more and more on her skills with numbers as she brought a new sense of order to the financial records. To her own surprise, Penny found out she had a real knack for the business side of things, quickly understanding the tangled details of cattle prices, feed orders, and payroll. You have got a natural head for this, girl, James said one evening while they looked over the neat new ledgers. In just 3 weeks, you have found profits I never even knew we were missing. It is really just a matter of keeping the book straight, Penny said, trying to be modest. Though his praise made her feel good, anyone with the right training could have done it. But they did not, he pointed out. You did, and this ranch is better off because of it. The next afternoon, Penny was focused on a stack of supply requests when a shadow fell over her desk. She looked up and saw Dylan standing in the doorway, looking unusually hesitant for a man like him. May I come in? He asked, his voice formal. Of course, she pushed her papers aside, suddenly very aware of the ink on her fingers and how messy her hair must be. Uncle James is not here right now, I know. It is you I came to see, he said as he walked in, but he stayed standing, even though she pointed to a chair. I wanted to say I am sorry about that dance we missed. It was not right of me to ask you and then not be able to follow through. You do not need to apologize, she told him. The ranch has to come first. I understand that. Dylan nodded and he seemed a little relieved. All the same, I would like to make it up to you. Your uncle told me you have not seen much of anything besides the ranch and the road into town. That is true. I have been pretty busy with all this. She waved a hand at the ledgers piled around her. The spring roundup starts next week, he went on. It is hard work, but we always have a celebration when it is over. A real barbecue with all the neighboring ranches. It is not as fancy as a town dance, but it is a good chance to meet folks. Would you consider going with me? He asked the question with such a serious dignity that Penny could not help but smile. I would be delighted, Dylan. You could feel his relief, and he stood up a little straighter. Good, that is real good. He cleared his throat. By the way, the rustler problem is getting better. We caught 2 of Harper's men trying to run cattle across our south pasture yesterday. The rest of them will think twice about trying that again. I am so glad to hear that. Uncle James has been worried, even if he tries not to let it show. He is a good man, Dylan said simply. The best I have ever worked for. A quiet moment passed between them, and neither one seemed to know what to say next. Finally, Dylan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. I found this when I was riding patrol up on the North Ridge, he said, opening his hand for her to see. I thought you might like it. Lying in his calloused palm was a perfectly shaped arrowhead, the stone worn smooth by time and weather. It is beautiful, Penny said with awe as she took the small gift from him. How old do you suppose it is? It is hard to say. The Shoshone hunted all through this country for generations before any settlers came. It could be 50 years old, or it could be 500. Penny turned the artifact over in her fingers, admiring the skill it took to make it. Thank you. It is a wonderful piece of history. Dylan shifted his feet, looking almost embarrassed that she was so grateful. It is not anything fancy. I just figured you might like having a little keepsake from your new home. The simple gesture and the thought behind it touched her more than any expensive gift ever could. Unlike the fancy trinkets her Boston admirers used to give her, this gift showed real thoughtfulness. It proved he understood what she truly valued. I will absolutely treasure this, she told him, with all sincerity, and I am so looking forward to the Roundup celebration. His smile in that moment was wide open and genuine, bringing a welcome warmth to his usually serious face. Until then, Miss Chamberlain, the formal words, spoken with a playful undertone, made her laugh. Until then, Mr. Caldwell. The spring roundup was a spectacle unlike anything Penny had ever witnessed. For a full week, the whole ranch moved at a frantic speed. Cowboys were in the saddle from before dawn till after dusk, gathering cattle from the winter pastures, branding the new calves, and cutting out the ones headed for market. From her spot on the ranch house porch, Penny took in the controlled chaos with wide-eyed wonder. Dylan seemed to be everywhere at once, giving orders to his men, settling disagreements, and orchestrating the huge task of moving hundreds of head of cattle. Even though he'd catch her eye now and then, their only contact was a quick nod across the bustling ranch yard. Once all the hard work was done, the celebration Dylan spoke of turned out to be a truly big deal. Ranchers from all the neighboring spreads came with their families. Long tables were set up beneath the shade of cottonwood trees, and the delicious smell of a giant pit barbecue hung in the air. Penny, who had taken extra care in getting ready, felt a nervous excitement as she came down to join the party. Her blue cotton dress was modest compared to Boston fashions, but it was cut to flatter her shape perfectly. She had styled her hair in a way that was both fashionable and sensible. She saw Dylan right away, talking with a group of fellows near the barbecue pit. He had traded his dusty work clothes for a crisp white shirt and a dark vest, with his hair combed neat under his good hat. Even from far off, it was clear he was a handsome man among the other ranch hands. James caught her arm before she could walk over to him. There's my girl. Come say howdy to the Hendersons. No kin to our Mrs. Henderson. They own the spread just north of us. For the next hour, Penny felt like she was introduced to every rancher for 50 miles around, not to mention their wives and kids and sometimes their whole extended clan. She kept a smile on her face, made small talk, and tried her best not to let her eyes wander too much toward Dylan, who was busy playing the host right alongside her uncle. At last, just as the musicians started tuning their instruments on a makeshift stage, Dylan appeared right by her side, handing her a cup of punch. You look mighty lovely, he said plain and simple, but his eyes showed his admiration clear as day. Thank you. She took the cup from him, noticing how the setting sun brought out reddish gold streaks in his dark hair. It looked like the roundup went well, from what I could see. Best one in years, he confirmed. Your uncle's herd is growing just fine. That new breeding stock we brought in from Colorado is really starting to pay for itself. Now that conversation might sound like nothing special to an outsider, but Penny knew what it really was. It was the shared love for the ranch that connected them, giving them common ground that went deeper than their very different pace. As the band struck up a lively fiddle tune, calling folks to the open space for dancing, Dylan put his cup down and held out his hand to her. Would you do me the honor of a dance, Miss Chamberlain? The formal way he asked, mixed with the warmth in his gaze, was a delightful surprise that sent a little thrill right through her. I would be delighted, Mr. Caldwell. His hand was warm and firm when it took hers, and he led her out to where the others were dancing. When he rested his other hand on her waist for the fast-paced reel, Penny was touched by how respectful he was. His touch was solid enough to lead her properly, but gentle enough to show he knew his manners. Whatever Dylan missed in formal dance lessons, he surely made up for with a natural sense of rhythm and grace. He moved her through the steps with confidence, his own feet sure and precise, even with the quick tempo of the song. You're a fine dancer for a cowboy, she said, a little out of breath as they spun around each other. His smile flashed, completely changing his serious face. Rodeos and ranch parties were the only lessons I ever got in being sociable. I'm afraid I'd be a sorry sight in a Boston ballroom. I find your style suits the occasion perfectly, she promised him, loving the way his eyes crinkled up when he smiled. They stayed together for 3 whole songs, that energetic reel, then a slower waltz that let them stand a little closer, and finally a fun polka that had them both laughing by the time it was over. As they were catching their breath on the sidelines, James came over with an older couple. "Penny, I want you to meet Judge and Mrs. Patterson," her uncle said. "The judge here is interested to hear about the new bookkeeping system you've set up." With a look of apology toward Dylan, Penny let her uncle lead her away. The rest of the night went by in fits and starts, with just a few short chats with Dylan squeezed in between her duties. Another dance was cut short when a rancher from the next spread over wanted an introduction. A peaceful moment they had watching the stars was interrupted by Mrs. Henderson needing help with the dessert table. It was creeping up on midnight when Penny, tired but content, found a moment to herself at the edge of the crowd. The party was still going strong, but she had slipped away to take a breather, watching all the fun from the shadows of a big oak tree. Hiding out? Dylan's voice from right behind her made her jump. She spun around and saw him walking toward her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Just regrouping," she answered with a smile. "I think I've met more folks tonight than in my whole first month in Wyoming." He handed her one of the cups, and she took it with a grateful nod. "You've certainly made a good impression. Judge Patterson couldn't say enough about how smart you are. And Mrs. Hollister is already making plans to introduce me to her nephew." Something in his voice made her pause. Should I be flattered that Mrs. Hollister wants to play matchmaker? Dylan's face was carefully blank. "Her nephew is the banker down in Lair Amy. He is very well-to-do, considered a real prize from what I hear." "Is he?" Penny took a small sip of coffee, looking at Dylan over the top of her cup. "And what do you think about Mrs. Hollister's plans?" The question just hung there in the air between them, full of things neither one of them was saying out loud. Dylan searched her face in the soft glow of the party lanterns. "I think," he started speaking slowly, "that any man would be blessed to get your attention, Penny Chamberlain. But I truly hope you don't make up your mind based only on a man's position in this world." His words, so carefully chosen but so full of meaning, made her heart flutter. "I learned that lesson the hard way back in Boston," she answered quietly. "A man's title and his money are a poor trade for his character and just getting along." He seemed to relax just a little bit. "Your father raised you right." "Yes," she said. "He also taught me to see worth where other people might overlook it." She looked him straight in the eye. "Some treasures are not so shiny at first, but they become more precious than gold over time." Realization washed over his face, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with the gentle spring night. He moved a step closer, near enough for her to smell that clean scent of soap and leather she had come to know as his. "Penny," he started, his voice softer than before, "I am not a man with a lot of money or schooling. I cannot give you the kind of life you had in Boston. But Dylan, there you are!" James's loud voice cut through the air, stopping whatever Dylan was about to say. "The Henderson boys are calling out our hands for a roping contest. We need you to go defend the ranch's honor." And just like that, the moment was shattered. Dylan stepped away, his foreman's expression falling back into place as he gave her uncle a nod. "Be right there, sir." He looked back at Penny, and the regret on his face was plain to see. "I should go." "Of course," she replied, trying hard to hide the disappointment in her own voice. "Duty is calling." He waited just a second more, then said, "We will finish this talk soon." She nodded and watched him stride back to the party, his tall frame quickly disappearing into the crowd. Whatever he had been on the verge of telling her would have to wait. The next few days settled back into the usual rhythm, but with small changes. Dylan started finding more excuses to come up to the main house, bringing questions about ranch supplies or crew matters straight to Penny instead of waiting to talk to James. And Penny, for her part, suddenly developed a keen interest in riding out to check on cattle numbers or the water levels in the stock ponds. These jobs just so happened to line up with Dylan's daily rounds. Their time together, while short and supposedly all about ranch business, let their friendship grow deeper. Penny learned about Dylan's boyhood in Missouri, his first years working the long cattle drives, and his dream of one day owning his own little spread. She, in turn, told him about her life in Boston, her father's work, and how lost she felt after her parents were gone. About 2 weeks after the roundup party, Penny was in the ranch office going over invoices for feed when Dylan showed up in the doorway looking more serious than usual. "Have you got a minute?" he asked. His formal tone was a signal that something was not right. "Of course," she pushed her ledgers to the side. "Is everything okay?" Dylan stepped inside and shut the door behind him. That was definitely not his usual habit, and it made her worry even more. "Your uncle got a telegram from Boston this morning. There is a lawyer named Harrington asking about you." Penny felt a knot form in the pit of her stomach. "Elliot Harrington. He was my father's lawyer." Dylan nodded. "The message said something about urgent business that needed your attention or right away. James thought you ought to know." She sank back into her chair, her mind racing. I cannot imagine what kind of urgent business there could be. Would pop up months after I was long gone from Boston. Everything with my father's estate was squared away before I even headed west. "Will you have to go back east?" He asked the question, trying to sound like it was no big deal, but Penny could hear the worry hiding underneath his words. "I just do not know," she confessed. "I figure I ought to send a wire back, at the very least." "Of course," Dylan paused for a second, then said, "Your uncle is getting ready to ride into town right now. If you want to send a reply, he can take it over to the telegraph office for you." Penny gave a little nod, already grabbing for some paper and a pen. "Thank you for letting me know." He stayed there for another moment, looking like he had more to say, but he just dipped his head a bit and walked away. The answer from Boston arrived 3 days later, carrying news that hit Penny like a ton of bricks. Elliot Harrington wrote that a very large investment her father had made just before he passed had paid off big, making Penny the sole heir to a whole lot of money. They needed her back in Boston to sign all the papers and figure out what to do with the funds. "That is a blessing, honey," James said with a firm nod when she told him the news. "Your daddy is still looking after you from beyond." Penny just nodded, not really there, her mind all jumbled up. "Yes, it is quite a surprise." "When are you planning to leave?" her uncle asked, his question cutting right through her daze. "Leave," she echoed. "For Boston," he said, making it clear. "I am guessing you will need to head back there to take care of all this in person." The very idea of going back east, even just for a little while, made her feel a surprising dread. In the few months since she had gotten there, Wyoming had started to feel more like home than Boston ever did. "I suppose I have to," she finally agreed, "but not for good. My life is out here now." James looked at her face for a long moment, and his expression softened like he understood everything. "This is about something more than just this ranch, is it not?" A blush crept up her neck. "I do not know what you are talking about." Her uncle let out a soft chuckle. "I may be getting old, girl, but I am not blind. I have seen the way you watch my foreman. And more importantly, I have seen the way he looks right back at you when he thinks nobody is paying attention." Penny just stared at him, unable to find a single word. "Dylan is a good man," James went on. "The best I have ever had. He is a proud man, though, way too proud to be courting the boss's niece. Unless he was absolutely sure she wanted him to, especially now that she is about to inherit a Boston fortune." "That money does not change a thing," Penny said firmly. "Well, then you make sure he knows it," her uncle told her. "Before you head back east." Her chance showed up sooner than she figured. That evening, while Penny was sitting on the porch watching the sun paint the far-off mountains, Dylan's familiar shape appeared on his horse, riding in from a long day's work. He swung down at the hitching post, took off his hat, and raked a hand through his hair before walking toward the house. He looked a little surprised to see her sitting there all by herself. "Evening, Miss Chamberlain. Is your uncle around?" "He rode out to the north pasture to check on a sick calf," she told him. "He will not be back till morning." Dylan nodded, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. "Well then, I will just put my report on his desk. Or you could come sit with me," Penny offered, pointing to the empty chair next to her. "It is a beautiful evening." He thought about it for a second before he walked up the steps and sat down in the chair she offered, setting his hat on his knee. "James told me you got some news from Boston." "Yes," she turned in her chair to look straight at him. "It turns out my father made an investment before he passed that brought in some unexpected money. I have to go to Boston to handle all the paperwork." Dylan's face stayed perfectly calm. "Congratulations. That is a lucky turn of events." Is it? She asked him quietly. I am, I'm not so sure that luck is something you can measure in dollars and cents, Dylan. His eyes met hers and he seemed to be searching for something. No, so how would you measure it? By how full a person's life is, by having a purpose and good company. She took in a slow, deep breath. By love, and that word just hung there in the air between them, full of unspoken meaning. Dylan's hands gripped the brim of his hat a little tighter. That is a smart way to see things, he finally said. A way that a lot of folks with money never figure out. My father saw it that way, Penny went on. He could have married my mother off to a richer family, but he picked love over money. I never once heard him say he regretted it. Dylan sat there quietly for a good long while, his eyes on the distant mountains glowing gold in the setting sun. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quiet but strong. Penny, I have to ask you something, and I need you to give me a straight answer. He turned to face her completely. Are you going back to Boston for good? The question was so direct, it caught her off guard. No, she answered right away. My home is right here now. I am only going for as long as it takes to get these things settled, and then I am coming right back to the ranch. You could see the relief wash over his face. You are sure about that? Boston has a lot to offer a young woman with means, you know. Society, culture, all the comforts Wyoming cannot give you. Boston also has a lot of fences that Wyoming does not put up, she shot back. Out here, people judge me for what I can do, not just for my family name or my money. Out here, I've found a reason for being. And out here, she paused, then pushed on with a quiet resolve in the air. Out here, I found someone worth staying for. The words just hung there in the quiet between them. Dylan set his hat down beside him and leaned in just a little. When we first met, he said, his voice slow and deliberate, during that hailstorm, I thought you were the prettiest woman I had ever laid eyes on. Soaked clean through, scared, but still trying your best to stay tall in that saddle. Penny could not help but smile at the memory. I was scared to death. And then all of a sudden, you were right there offering me shelter under your coat like some kind of hero out of a storybook. No hero, he said, shaking his head. Just a cowboy doing what needed to be done. That is what makes you so special, Dylan, she said softly. You just do what is right without any fuss or wanting a reward. You take care of this ranch, of the men who work on it, and of my uncle. And I think you care about me, too. His eyes never left her face. More than I have ever cared for anyone, he admitted, and his voice got deeper with feeling. More than I ever thought I could. That simple statement, said so plainly, touched her more than any fancy speech ever could have. Without thinking, she reached over and took his rough, calloused hand in hers. Then ask me what you really want to ask me, she whispered. Dylan's fingers closed tight around hers. For a man who was so sure of himself and everything else, this crack in his armor was surprising and sweet. I am not a rich man, Penny, he started. I have some money saved up, and I have plans for a little place of my own one day. But it would be a simple life next to what you are used to. I do not need to be rich, she cut in. I need a partner, someone I can respect and trust, someone who sees me as his equal, not just some pretty thing or a convenience. His whole face softened. You will always be my equal, and in a lot of ways you are more than my equal with your smarts and your education. Sometimes I wonder what in the world you could see in a man like me. I see strength and honor and a deep kindness, she answered him without a second thought. I see a man who protects others without thinking about himself. I see the man I have fallen in love with. When she said the word love, something changed in Dylan's eyes, a look of surprise that gave way to a happiness so pure it lit up his entire face. I have never been one for fancy words, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I have loved you since that day in the hailstorm, Penny Chamberlain. I just never let myself dream that you might feel the same way. Saying it out loud, after holding it in for so long, seemed to set something free in him. In one smooth move, he was out of his chair and kneeling in front of her, still holding her hands tight in his. I know this is not how they do it back in Boston, he said, with a little bit of a self-conscious smile in his voice. But I am asking you now, with nothing to give you but myself and my promise to always treasure you. Penny Chamberlain, when you come back from Boston, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? A bright, bubbly joy rose up inside her. Yes, Dylan Caldwell, with every piece of my heart. Yes, his smile was like the sunrise as he stood up, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. When his lips finally found hers in a kiss that was so gentle and unbelievably sweet, Penny knew without a doubt that she had truly found her home. The trip to Boston and back took 6 weeks longer than either Dylan or Penny had planned on. But it was time she needed to get her affairs in order. The whole time she was gone, his letters came like clockwork, brought in by the stagecoach that connected their quiet little corner of the world to everything else. In them, he would tell her all the ranch news, about the progress on the small cabin he had started building on a piece of land James had given them for a wedding present. And the most precious thing of all, his steady love and how much he was counting the days until she came back. When she finally stepped off that dusty stagecoach in the middle of August, Dylan was right there waiting. His face broke into a grin that wiped away all the weeks they had been apart in a single heartbeat. To heck with what anyone thought, he pulled her into his arms right there in front of the whole town, getting cheers from the folks watching and a knowing smile from the stage driver. "Welcome home," he whispered into her hair, his voice all thick with emotion. "Home," she repeated, and the word felt bigger and deeper now. "That sounds so lovely." They were married 2 weeks after that in a little ceremony that was a mix of frontier practicality and some of her finer Eastern tastes. Penny wore a beautiful cream silk gown she had ordered from Denver, while Dylan looked more handsome than ever in a new suit that Mrs. Henderson had secretly tailored to fit his broad shoulders just right. James gave her away with tears shining on his weathered cheeks, and the whole town came out to celebrate with them and afterward, with a big feast that went on late into the night. Their cabin, while not large, was built solid on a little hill that looked out over a curve in the creek running through the ranch. Dylan had filled it with furniture he made with his own 2 hands, along with a few special things Penny had brought back from Boston, like her mother's silver tea set and her father's favorite books. There was even a small painting of the Massachusetts coast. "One of these days, we're going to build us something real grand," he promised her on their first night as man and wife, standing on the porch and watching the stars pop out over the Wyoming plains. "Soon as we've saved up enough." Penny just leaned into his shoulder, feeling a kind of peace she'd never known before. "Honey, this is already perfect," she told him. "It ain't the size of the house that makes a home, it's the love that's inside it." His arm pulled her in a little tighter. "Well then, darling, we must have the richest home in this whole territory." And the years that came after proved she was right. They did get more comfortable, especially after Penny used her inheritance to grow the ranch, making both Dylan and James full partners. But the real treasure of the life they built together came from a much deeper place. True joy showed up with their first baby, a little girl they named Margaret after Penny's own mother. 2 years after that, a son came along, and they called him Charles James to honor both of their fathers. The ranch just thrived with the three of them working it, and it grew into one of the most successful spreads in the whole territory. When Wyoming finally became a state in 1890, Dylan was one of the men they picked to help write the new Constitution, which just goes to show you the kind of respect he had earned. Through all of it, the bitter cold winters, the dry spells now and then, and all the trials of raising kids on the frontier, the bedrock of their life never changed. It was the love that had started on that one fateful day when a bookkeeper from Boston got caught in a Wyoming hailstorm, and a cowboy offered her shelter right under his own coat. On their 25th anniversary, as they watched their grandkids running around the yard of the bigger house that finally replaced that first little cabin, Penny got to thinking about the long road that had brought them to that very spot. "You got any regrets?" Dylan asked, seeing the far-off look in her eyes. Even with the silver now mixed in his dark hair and the lines the Wyoming sun had drawn around his eyes, he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "Not a single one," she answered, telling the honest truth as she took his hand. "That hailstorm was the best danged thing that ever happened to me." His laugh, so warm and familiar, felt like a warm blanket wrapped around her. "Well, I've been meaning to tell you something," he admitted with a little twinkle in his eye. "There wasn't any storm on the forecast that day. James told me not to, but I rode out to find you anyway. I just had this gut feeling, call it what you want, that you might need a hand." Penny just stared at him, completely stunned. All these years and you're just now telling me? Would it have made any difference? He asked, his face turning serious. Would you have chosen another path, knowing I went against orders just to come find you? She reached a hand up to touch his face, that face she loved so much, amazed at the journey they had taken. No, she said softly. I reckon I would have loved you even more for it. Some things, my darling, are just plain meant to be. As that big Wyoming sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and deep red, Dylan pulled his wife into his arms. His kiss was just as tender and full of promise as the very first one they had shared on her uncle's porch all those years ago. The storm that had thrown them together was long gone, but the shelter they had built inside each other's hearts, well, that was going to last for the rest of their days.